Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Merchant. This is a 3-cost action card from the 2nd edition base game. It says +1 card, +1 action. The first time you play a silver this turn, +1 coin. So Merchant, when you get to play it alongside a silver, is what we call a cantrip coin. So cantrip means +1 card, +1 action, and it gives you a coin as well. If you don't play a silver, then it's just a cantrip, or what I call a do-nothing cantrip in that case. Don't be fooled by the fact that it says +1 card. If you play something that only gives you +1 card, +1 action, that's actually doing nothing for you in your deck. It's the same as if you'd never purchased the card. So the good news is that that doesn't hurt you, right? It's not like a stop card that actively gets in the way. However, it's not really adding any benefit. So although it's sort of low risk, Merchant, to some extent, you can do better than buying a card that does nothing for you if you cannot trigger this off very often. So cantrip coin is an effect that's normally costed at around 4. Merchant costs less than that because it's got the potential to not give you the coin. Merchant's pretty good value. It's often quite easy to trigger that extra +1 coin in the sorts of decks where you can do it reliably. If you can't do it reliably, you just wouldn't buy Merchant generally, so you're usually only going to play with Merchant when you can, and that means that you're getting a good efficiency because Merchant is quite cheap. Now, the difference between 4 and 3 is not actually that big, but with Merchant being an economy card that's giving you money, it makes it very easy to escalate quite quickly the amount of money in your deck when the card that gives you money is also very cheap. So you can buy a lot of Merchants in bulk, and you can buy a lot more of them sometimes just because it's nice and cheap. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, Merchant is a nice, reliable card. If you are doing a deck that you try to draw all of it every turn, those are usually the sorts of decks you want to build anyway because they're so strong. Merchant goes really well with those. You only need 1 silver in that deck to get all of your Merchants to give you a coin, and because Merchants themselves are cantrips, they don't get in the way of you building your deck. So you can just add a load of them in, and it's no more difficult to draw your deck than it was before, right? So that's nicer than adding silvers, usually in that case, because silver is a stop card, and it can stop you drawing your deck. In that sort of deck as well, you may find sometimes that 2 Merchants cost 6, which is the same as gold, and the Merchants are going to be better than the gold, and the reason for that is, again, just because they're not a stop card. You are losing a little bit of money over like buying a gold or 2 silvers, but the reliability is really nice in that case. If a deck doesn't have much draw, then you may struggle to connect your Merchant with your silver, and you usually don't want it in that case. If you play a Merchant and you didn't get a silver, then you may find that that meant that your turn was worse than it otherwise would have been, and Merchant costs the same as silver, so in that sort of situation, you're probably better off just buying the silver and ignoring the Merchant. So Merchant, it's a great engine card, basically. You want to draw your deck, which is normally what you do, and Merchant fits really well in that sort of deck. One thing to keep note of are trashing attacks. Some attacks from your opponent can trash your treasures. So Bandit in the base game is an example of a trashing attack that solely focuses on treasures. If you lose your last silver, then any Merchants that you have in your deck will suddenly stop being able to actually generate you any money, and that if you are relying on a lot of Merchants to get you a lot of money, not only do you lose the 2 coin from the silver, but you lose the 1 coin from every Merchant as well, and that can be a devastatingly large loss of money for a turn. So if you've got like Bandit in the Kingdom and you still want to go for a deck with a lot of Merchants, you should probably get more than 1 silver, just so that if your opponent's Bandit hits your silver, you're not losing straight away. You get the chance to just always keep a spare around or more. Or if there's a lot of trashing attacks because it's multiplayer, then maybe you don't want to go for Merchant, although, it depends, really. Merchant's still pretty good. If you've got a lot of them and only 1 or 2 silvers, it's not that likely to hit your silvers either. And some trashing attacks don't just focus on treasures, so anything that attacks cards that cost 3 You might find that they're more likely to trash your merchants than your silver anyway, so, that's how that is. Now, something really important is the wording on merchant. It specifically says the first time you play a silver this turn. So the merchant will only generate money if you play it before you play your first silver in a turn. After you've played a silver, any further merchants will not actually generate you any money, and there are some unusual circumstances within which this can happen. Normally, because you play your action cards first and then your treasures, you never see this. You certainly will never have a problem in the base game, but outside the base game, there are some unusual cards that will let you do unusual things. So one example here is cards that let you play treasures during your action phase. So Storyteller lets you convert money into draw, and it lets you play treasures from your hand to get the money from them now and immediately convert it to draw. So Storyteller's a bit weird with Merchant. The merchants, when you play them, originally they are not giving you any money. They only give you money as soon as you play the silver. So Storyteller, you can play a load of merchants and then Storyteller, and you haven't really got that much draw, and then eventually you play a silver and suddenly you get a whole load of money at once and you get a big draw off Storyteller, and then any further merchants just don't generate you any money at all. So I'm not saying that it doesn't work with Storyteller, but it is very awkward and you need to be careful of that. Black Market is a promo card that lets you effectively mimic a buy phase, a special buy phase in the middle of your action phase. So you get a chance to play all of the treasures from your hand and buy some special cards in a special Black Market deck. Again, usually you would play a Black Market at the end of your action phase because it's kind of like a payload. It's not drawing you at the time. But there are certain circumstances such as draw to X engines where you want to get all those treasures out of your hand in the middle of the turn, and you can end up playing Black Market early, and therefore you can end up playing a silver quite early, and that can ruin your merchants, so do watch out. Another unusual situation is coming back to your action phase after you've been in your buy phase. So Villa from Empires and Cavalry from Menagerie, when you buy these cards, they send you back to your action phase. And if you've played a silver in order to afford these cards and get sent back to your action phase, if you then carry on drawing cards and you find some merchants, the merchants will not give you any more money if you've already played the silver. So again, watch out. Doesn't mean that they are bad, but does mean they can be a little bit awkward in those decks, and you may unexpectedly find yourself not generating as much money as you thought, and therefore meaning returning to your action phase wasn't actually as good as you would have hoped it would be. And last but not least, sometimes you can play action cards in your buy phase. So Scepter from Renaissance. This is a treasure that when you play it, you can play an action card that you already played this turn. Again, with cards like Scepter, usually you will just use your Scepters first before you play your other treasures. You do have to watch out with the online client pressing that autoplay or treasures button. It will try and play your other treasures first, and then you get a chance to play your Scepters. So you just want to focus on playing Scepters first. And if for some reason you want to use Scepter on Merchant, then, you want to make sure, just be careful with the ordering of which you do things. Capitalism is another example, again from Renaissance. Any action card that has the plus coin symbol on it, which Merchant does, it has here +1 coin, these will become treasure cards, so you can play them in your buy phase. So you might be using a card like Steward to draw with Capitalism, because it has plus coin, but it has plus cards. And because it's normally terminal, you would use Capitalism to play it in your buy phase, so it's sort of non-terminal, and you can draw merchants doing that. So again, with Capitalism, usually you just need to be careful about the order in which you play things. Now, Gamble and Toil, which are events from Menagerie, these are things where you are spending money to play more action cards, and while admittedly you might not use Toil on merchants, Gamble could easily hit merchants if you got a lot of them, and you may have had to play a silver in order to buy Gamble, and therefore you may just flip over a merchant and it's not going to get you money anymore. In fact, it's important to note with events that because as soon as you've bought something, you can't play any more treasures, you will most likely be playing any silvers in your hand before you play gamble, because as soon as you buy the gamble, you can't play the silver anymore. And so, using gamble in a deck filled with merchants could sometimes be a little bit awkward or not as effective as you think it is. And that's really all there is to say about Merchant. It's a pretty simple card, so this is not going to be a very long video. So we are going to go and move ahead to the online client, and we are going to generate some random kingdoms that involve Merchant. And we're just going to assess these kingdoms and see what we think. So what are we doing here? So we're going to trash down with Chapel straight away. We have Village, Smithy, and Labs all for draw. There's Workshop. Workshop lets you gain a lot of these things. There's Festival for buy. But also, so you're going to use a lot of merchants here. You're going to trash down to be very thin. You're going to be using Workshop to pick up some villages and smithies, and you've got throne rooms to draw really well. You can also throne the merchants or throne festivals. And it's very easy to start generating quite a lot of money with merchant. So you have 1 silver, and then you just pile on the merchants, and it's so easy to draw your deck in this board. Very, very easy indeed. So you can get a lot of money from merchants, and you can do it while being very consistent. You don't even need that many smithies. And you get some throne rooms, you can play them on merchant for a little bit more money. Eventually, when you've drawn everything, you play them on festival. So this is just massive amounts of cantrips here. Merchant is a key card on this board because a lot of your money is going to come from merchant. And once you've bought all of them, you can start looking into picking up golds instead, or maybe even start workshopping some silvers, honestly. You can just do that. So you're going to get a lot of merchants here. Merchant is a key economy card on this board. Perfect setup because it's a nice, easy to draw your deck engine. What's going on this board? So here we have, it looks like a festival library engine. There is no trashing, which makes that a bit worse, actually. But festival moat or festival smithy is also not so great. The lack of trashing means it's going to be hard to find silvers, but there is mine. Would we use mine just to turn our coppers into silvers and then load up on some merchants to make it easy to play? Is that a thing we would do? Let me think. So we want, instead of festivals, you've got market. I think it could work. I think you've got throne room and merchant as a village, actually. So you can, how likely are you to connect throne rooms with merchants and then use smithy for draw? The fact that you have 10 stop cards at all times is a bit of a problem. So this is either a very awkward engine that you try to go for anyway, or it's just going to be something like Smithy Big Money, but I think Smithy Big Money is going to struggle. I think you can do sort of a mine and merchant thing, and mine will slowly make it more and more likely to find a silver. You just happen to have a lot of your stop cards that you can't get rid of be silvers, and then merchant can make your money a little bit better. But that still feels bad overall. But if you can get a lot of merchants and markets and buy a lot of merchants from that, you can start using throne room as a village and get some smithy. So I think there's a partial draw deck engine going on here that's not great. I think library just isn't good enough to draw on this board, sadly, with all of the treasure and victory stop cards. So I think you do go for merchant here. I think even though it's just you're quite likely to not miss, and you really don't want to be adding more stop cards if you can at all help it. So the fact that there's a stop card form of money that's cheaper than market is really nice. I think you get some merchants there, but it's not a brilliant engine, but I think it's still better to go for it in that case. What have we got here? Is it important to hit 5 straight away? Probably not. There is no trashing, so you're probably not going to vassal. Again, there is mine. Is that good? There's no village on this board. Actually, that's a problem. So militia's really nice. if you're going to play only one terminal, it would be militia, I think, because there is no engine on this board with no village. So what you really want to do is you just want to get a lot of money and just get a bunch of militias, and are you really just going to do militia money? Like, militia really hurts money strategies, but there's nothing you can do about it here. So I think you want to be the person who is playing militia as often as possible, and it's just going to be a really slow, long, boring, like, hard to get game. You might even end up buying some gardens. I don't think it's good enough to workshop gardens in this case. I think the militia and money would be better. If your opponent tries to workshop gardens, your militia money should beat that, just because you are not having to deal with 3-card hands. I don't think you really care about merchant or market here. You just want to buy 1 card at a time, like gold, silver, and a bunch of militias, and play those as often as you can. So I think merchant no good here, and that is because there is no engine. We have chapel and sentry for trashing. There is witch. How good is witch here? Probably not very good. The only village is throne room, and you can always play that on sentries or merchants, which is quite nice, and that helps you draw up with smithy, which is going to be better than library. Having said that, there's the only buy is council room. Okay, so bandit, the trashing attack from bandit, slightly worrying if you're going with merchant. There is bandit remodel. That's actually going to be better here. So because you have a village, you might just get some merchants, but they're hard to get. I don't think you're playing a council room, so there's only 1 buy per turn. So what you really want to be doing is playing bandit to get golds, remodel golds into provinces so that you can get more than 1 province per turn. That's how you're doing it. You're not going to use council room buy for that. Merchants are merely okay here. They are probably easier to connect with throne room without a sentry. I would probably get merchant on 3 over too many silvers. Eventually, I'm going to be going for bandit to get most of my money. And at that point, it doesn't really matter the merchant. Like, if the silver gets trashed, the merchant is in my deck. Well, so what, right? I could probably eventually remodel it into a sentry instead, right? So I think merchant, you might get a merchant at some point, but you don't really care about merchant. It's just you want to get your deck into a drawable state, and merchant will be nice for a small while until you transition into playing bandit. I think witch is bad here. You would much rather smithy for draw. It's just going to be very easy to keep clean because chapel gets you clean so quickly, and then there's sentry. Right, so sentry, the combination of those means that witch isn't really going to be able to do anything with its curses. So, yeah, so merchant is largely ignorable on that board, but you might pick one up for a bit more money at some point. What do we have here? So, throne room and festival are villages. There is no trashing at all. There is artisan to gain labs. There is always smithy, and you've got nice village space. I think you are going to look to try and get artisan as soon as you can because you want a bunch of laboratories. I think the draw is good enough here with throne room. You could actually, I think you definitely get a workshop. You want throne rooms and merchants for like a village effect, but I think you will eventually be buying council room. You can get some smithies easily with workshop, but you might pick up the council room or 2 and draw a lot. And I think even though there's no trashing, because there's a lot of ways to draw, it's very worth building the engine. You can easily add 1 silver early on when you're trying to aim for artisan. You open like silver smithy. And then once you've got that, you will over time be able to start picking up some merchants with workshop. And eventually you will just have some merchants. You want to focus on getting your draw up first, but after that, you can fit in some merchants. So merchants nice here. I don't know how many of them you're going to have in practice, but you really want to have the merchants to give you extra money over adding even more stock cards, because you're always going to have 7 coppers. You're probably going to have another silver. That puts you at 9 money. You might get a festival or 2. And so merchants will make up the rest to try and get up to double province. And Yeah, I think it's better than having too many festivals. It's also nice to be able to... You can throne labs, but sometimes you might be able to throne merchants as well. That just might be a nice way to get a little more draw for when you eventually find a council room or a smithy in your hand. So I think we can build up to a double province here, and merchant will help towards that, but it's not like the cornerstone of your economy. It's only just a nice small card that's very low costed because you've got workshop that can just pick them up for you. And you're probably going to have some spare buys sometimes where you've got 3 and you can just pick up a merchant then. Right, it's nice to add them here. And if it does miss on some turn, it's not really that big a deal. You will have plenty of economy coming from coppers and silver and the like. So, yeah. So there you go. So merchant was pretty useful in all of those boards. There was some where it's critical. There are some where you barely ignore it, and a lot of it depends on how easy it is to gain them, if there's spare buys, and most importantly though is whether or not you've got a deck drawing engine. That's really where the focus lies for merchant. Anyway, that's all I think I have to say on that very, very simple card. Thank you for watching. I hope this was enjoyable for you, and I hope to see you for the next video. Thank you and goodbye.